Alright, so let's dive into one of the Bible's most intriguing mysteries, Cain's wife. I mean, have you ever wondered, where on earth did she come from? We all know the story. Cain, the first murderer, son of Adam and Eve, kills his brother Abel and is banished. Then, out of nowhere, the Bible drops this bomb, and Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch. Wait, what? Wife? Where did she come from? Because the Bible doesn't exactly give us a play-by-play on this. So here's the deal. The traditional interpretation, coming straight from centuries of Jewish and Christian thought, is that Cain married his sister. Yep, that's right, his sister. Back then, the ancient rabbis, early church fathers, and pretty much everyone in between had to grapple with this glaring plot hole. If Adam and Eve were the first humans, and Cain is their first son, then Cain's wife has got to be a close relative, right? Now, you might be thinking, isn't that weird? And yeah, by today's standards, it absolutely is. But back in the day, this was totally necessary. The idea was that Adam and Eve were the first humans, and from them, the entire human race descended. If Cain didn't marry his sister, where else was he going to find a wife? There wasn't exactly a bustling single scene outside the Garden of Eden. But hold up, because this interpretation wasn't just a throwaway thought. It's rooted in the ancient understanding of human origins. Jewish tradition, for example, often cites the Talmud, which straight up says that Adam and Eve had many sons and daughters, way more than just Cain, Abel, and Seth. These unnamed children had to pair up to keep the family tree growing. And here's where it gets interesting. Some Jewish scholars even named Cain's wife as a one, who was, you guessed it, his sister. It's like biblical genealogy on steroids. But let's not stop there, because the church fathers had their own takes too. Guys like Augustine and Aquinas argued that early humans were pure enough that sibling marriages weren't the same as they are today. In their eyes, the human race needed to start somewhere, and this was God's way of getting the ball rolling. They believed that because Adam and Eve were created directly by God, their genetic makeup was perfect, so it wouldn't cause the issues we'd expect today. And here's where things get really deep. This idea also ties into how these early thinkers saw sin and the fall. Adam and Eve's perfection meant that their kids were also perfect, at least until sin started corrupting everything. So, in a way, Cain marrying his sister was a necessary part of humanity's early development. It's like the Bible is telling us that sometimes, in a fallen world, God's plan isn't always what we'd expect. But before you think this is all cut and dry, let's talk about the debates, because there are plenty of scholars today who look at this and say, hold on, this doesn't make sense. Some argue that the Bible's silence on Cain's wife is intentional, that it's not about the specifics of who she was, but what her story represents. They say it's about the spread of humanity, the consequences of sin, and the complexities of a world outside Eden. Others suggest that maybe, just maybe, there's something more symbolic going on here, like Cain's wife represents the start of human society beyond Adam and Eve's family. And isn't that the beauty of it? The Bible gives us just enough to keep us asking questions, to make us dig deeper. Whether you take the traditional view or explore alternative interpretations, Cain's wife is more than just a footnote in Genesis. She's a mystery that challenges us to think about where we come from, how we interpret ancient texts, and what it all means for us today. So, what do you think? Could Cain's wife really have been his sister? Or is there something more to the story? Alright, so we've cracked open the traditional story of Cain's wife, how she's likely his sister according to the mainstream biblical narrative. But what if I told you there's a whole other layer to this mystery? Now, let's step outside the canonical box and talk about the apocryphal and pseudepigraphal texts. These are the stories that were floating around in the ancient world, offering up some juicy details that the Bible leaves out. And trust me, these texts don't shy away from filling in the gaps. First up, we've got the Book of Jubilees. This book isn't part of the standard Bible, but it's super important in certain Jewish and Christian traditions. And guess what? Jubilees gives us names. It doesn't leave us hanging like the Genesis account. According to Jubilees, Cain's wife was named Awan, and she was indeed his sister. But here's where it gets interesting. This book doesn't just mention Awan in passing, it goes into detail about the early family dynamics. It talks about how Adam and Eve had other children, and how these early siblings paired up to start populating the earth. It's like the author of Jubilees looked at Genesis and thought, let's add some backstory here. But the story doesn't stop with Jubilees. Let's talk about the Book of Enoch, another text that's outside the canon but packed with fascinating insights. The Book of Enoch is all about the hidden, the mysterious, the stuff that happens behind the scenes in the spiritual world. While it doesn't name Cain's wife directly, it paints a picture of a world that's much more complex and, dare I say, dark than what we get in the Bible. It's a world where angels fall, giants roam, and human corruption runs deep. So when we think about Cain and his mysterious wife in the context of Enoch, it's not just about who she was, it's about what her existence represents. She's part of a world that's already spiraling out of control, a world where sin isn't just a personal failing, but a cosmic event. And then there's the life of Adam and Eve, another apocryphal text that gives us a window into the lives of the first humans. This one doesn't hold back on the drama. It portrays Adam and Eve's sorrow after being expelled from Eden, and it doesn't shy away from the fact that their children, Cain included, are born into a world that's harsh and unforgiving. It's in this context that Cain finds his wife. So when we think about Awan, or whoever Cain's wife might have been, it's not just about her being a sister or a relative. It's about her being a symbol of humanity's struggle to survive in a world that's been cursed. But let's take it a step further, because these texts do something really bold. They challenge us to rethink the whole narrative. They're not content with just filling in the gaps, they want us to question what we've been told. Why is Cain's wife barely mentioned in Genesis? Is it because her story was considered too controversial? Too complex? Or maybe because her identity would open up questions that the early writers weren't ready to tackle? The apocryphal texts suggest that there's more to the story of Cain and his wife than meets the eye. They push us to consider the possibility that the early human family wasn't just about Adam, Eve, Cain, and Abel, but about a larger, more complicated web of relationships, conflicts, and struggles. And in doing so, they invite us to see Cain's wife not just as a mysterious figure from the past, but as a key player in the unfolding drama of humanity's origins. So, where does that leave us? We've got the traditional view of Cain's wife as his sister, Awan, laid out in the Book of Jubilees. We've got the dark, complex world of the Book of Enoch, where Cain's marriage might symbolize something much bigger than just family ties. And we've got the life of Adam and Eve, reminding us that the world Cain lived in was far from the paradise his parents once knew. Alright, so we've peeled back the layers on Cain's wife through the lens of the traditional biblical account and some wild apocryphal texts. But let's shift gears and take a journey to a place where ancient traditions breathe life into stories that many of us have never heard before. I'm talking about Ethiopia, a land rich in history, spirituality, and, you guessed it, some seriously intriguing takes on the story of Cain. Now, if you thought the apocryphal texts were fascinating, wait until you hear what Ethiopian Christian traditions have to say. See, Ethiopia isn't just known for its coffee and landscapes, it's home to some of the oldest Christian communities in the world. And with that comes a treasure trove of ancient texts and oral traditions that offer a whole new perspective on Cain, his wife, and their mysterious origins. Let's dive into the Kebra Nagast, a key text in Ethiopian Christianity. While the Kebra Nagast is famous for its account of the Queen of Sheba and King Solomon, it also holds some lesser-known insights that tie into our story. Ethiopian tradition suggests that the descendants of Cain didn't just vanish into obscurity, they played a significant role in the early human narrative. And here's the kicker, some Ethiopian texts hint at the possibility that Cain's wife wasn't a blood relative at all, but someone from a different lineage altogether. This isn't just some minor detail, it flips the script on everything we've been talking about. If Cain's wife wasn't his sister, then who was she? Ethiopian tradition introduces the idea that there were other beings, possibly other humans or even spiritual entities, living outside of Adam and Eve's direct line. It's a bold claim, but it's one that forces us to rethink the entire story. Could it be that the world outside of Eden was populated by more than just Adam and Eve's descendants? And if so, what does that say about Cain's wife? But that's not all. Ethiopian Christianity has long held onto the idea of a deeper, more mystical understanding of the Bible stories. This tradition embraces the mysterious and the unexplained, suggesting that there's more to the story of Cain than what meets the eye. For instance, some Ethiopian scholars have argued that Cain's wife represents a union between the mortal and the divine, a merging of two different realms. This could mean that Cain's wife was more than just a woman. She might have been a being with a unique spiritual significance, one who played a crucial role in the unfolding of human history. Think about that for a second. We've gone from Cain marrying his sister, to the possibility of him marrying someone from a different lineage, to now considering that his wife could have been a bridge between two worlds. It's a concept that's both mind-blowing and provocative, one that challenges us to think beyond the literal and dive into the symbolic. And let's not forget that Ethiopian Christianity has a rich tradition of connecting biblical stories to their own history. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church sees itself as directly linked to the ancient Israelites, and as a result, they've preserved interpretations of the Bible that are unique to their culture. This means that the story of Cain and his wife isn't just an ancient myth to them, it's part of a living tradition, one that continues to shape their understanding of the world. So where does this leave us in our quest to understand Cain's wife? We've explored the traditional view, the apocryphal twists, and now this Ethiopian perspective that opens up a whole new realm of possibilities. The idea that Cain's wife could have come from a different lineage, or even a different spiritual plane, adds a layer of complexity to a story that's already full of mystery. But here's the thing, these Ethiopian traditions don't just add to the story, they challenge us to reconsider what we think we know. They invite us to explore the connections between the biblical narrative and the wider ancient world, to see the story of Cain and his wife not as an isolated event, but as part of a larger, more intricate tapestry. So, what do you think? Could Cain's wife have been someone, or something, far more complex than just a sister or relative? Alright, so we've already uncovered some pretty wild ideas about Cain's wife, from traditional accounts to ancient Ethiopian legends. But what if I told you there's an even more controversial theory out there, one that might just blow the lid off everything we think we know about the origins of humanity? I'm talking about the pre-Adamic theory, the idea that Cain's wife wasn't a relative at all because there were other humans on Earth before Adam and Eve. Now, I know what you're thinking. How does that even work? Well, buckle up, because this theory is going to take us on a ride through some of the most mind-bending interpretations of the Bible and ancient history. First off, let's get into what the pre-Adamic theory actually is. This idea suggests that Adam and Eve weren't the first humans created by God, but rather the first of a specific lineage, one that would eventually lead to the Israelites and, by extension, the rest of humanity as we know it. But according to this theory, other human-like beings, or even full-fledged humans, were already roaming the earth long before Adam and Eve ever set foot in Eden. So, what does this have to do with Cain's wife? Well, think about it, if there were other humans already living on Earth, then it's entirely possible that Cain didn't marry a sister or even a close relative. Instead, he could have married someone from this pre-Adamic population, someone who came from a completely different lineage, one that wasn't directly descended from Adam and Eve. This theory doesn't just add a twist to the story, it completely redefines how we understand the early chapters of Genesis. Suddenly, the vague references to the land of Nod, where Cain went after killing Abel, start to make a lot more sense. If there was already a thriving human population out there, then Nod wasn't just some barren wasteland, it was a community, possibly even a civilization, that Cain joined after being banished. And here's where things get really interesting. Some scholars and theologians have suggested that the pre-Adamic theory helps to explain some of the other strange and mysterious passages in the Bible, like the existence of the Nephilim, those giant, mighty beings mentioned in Genesis 6. Could these giants have been part of this pre-Adamic race, or the offspring of unions between pre-Adamic humans and the descendants of Adam and Eve? It's a provocative thought, one that ties together some of the Bible's most enigmatic stories into a single, cohesive narrative. But let's not stop there. The idea of pre-Adamic humanity isn't just a modern invention, it has roots in ancient thought, including in some early Jewish and Christian writings. For example, certain interpretations of the Talmud and even the writings of church fathers like Origen hint at the possibility that the earth was inhabited before Adam. Origen, for instance, entertained the idea that the souls of humans existed before they were given physical bodies, a concept that dovetails with the notion of pre-Adamic beings. And it doesn't stop with religious texts. Some proponents of the pre-Adamic theory even look to ancient myths and legends from other cultures, like the Sumerians, Egyptians, and Greeks, which also tell stories of gods and humans existing long before the creation of the world as described in Genesis. These stories often feature advanced civilizations, beings of immense power, and a connection between the divine and the earthly that's eerily similar to the Bible's account of early human history. So, what does this all mean for our story of Cain and his mysterious wife? It means that she could represent something much larger than just a single character in a biblical narrative. She could be a link to an ancient, forgotten history of humanity, one that existed before the fall of Adam, before the world as we know it was even created. And that, my friends, is a theory that not only shakes up our understanding of the Bible, but also challenges us to rethink everything we thought we knew about where we came from. Alright, so we've taken a deep dive into the mystery of Cain's wife, exploring everything from the traditional accounts to the mind-bending pre-Adamic theory. But if you thought we were done uncovering secrets, think again, because now, we're stepping into the shadowy world of banned and suppressed texts. These are the stories that didn't just get left out of the Bible, they were outright hidden from public view, kept out of the spotlight for centuries. And trust me, they've got some seriously controversial things to say about Cain and his mysterious wife. Let's start with the Gospel of Philip. Now, this isn't one of those well-known Gospels like Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John. The Gospel of Philip is a Gnostic text, part of a collection of writings that were deemed heretical by the early church. Why? Because Gnosticism presents a radically different view of Christianity, one where hidden knowledge, or gnosis, is the key to salvation, and where the material world is often seen as a prison for the soul. So, what does the Gospel of Philip have to say about Cain and his wife? While it doesn't mention them by name, it does offer a tantalizing glimpse into how Gnostics might have viewed their story. The Gospel of Philip talks a lot about the concept of SYZYGY, the idea of paired beings, male and female, who reflect divine truths. In this context, Cain's wife could be seen not just as his partner, but as his spiritual counterpart, a being whose existence is tied to his in ways that go beyond mere flesh and blood. But the really wild part comes when we dive into the Gnostic idea of the demiurge a lower god who created the material world and trapped souls within it. Some Gnostic texts suggest that Cain himself could have been the offspring of this demiurge, making him a figure of both divine and earthly origins. If Cain's wife was part of this same cosmic drama, then their union would represent a joining of two powerful, yet flawed, beings, each struggling to find their place in a world that's both physical and spiritual. And it doesn't stop there. Let's talk about the Gospel of Judas, another Gnostic text that was lost for nearly 1,700 years before it was rediscovered in the 20th century. This gospel presents Judas not as a traitor, but as the one disciple who truly understood Jesus' message. Now, you might be wondering, what does this have to do with Cain and his wife? Here's the connection. The Gospel of Judas portrays the act of betrayal not as evil, but as a necessary step in the unfolding of a divine plan. In the same way, Cain's act of murder and his subsequent marriage could be seen as part of a larger, cosmic narrative, one where every action, no matter how dark, serves a hidden purpose. These Gnostic texts turn the traditional story on its head. They suggest that Cain and his wife weren't just historical figures, but symbols of a deeper spiritual struggle, a struggle between light and darkness, knowledge and ignorance, divinity and humanity. And this struggle isn't just something that happened in the distant past, it's a conflict that plays out in every one of us, every day. But let's not forget about the books of Adam and Eve, another set of texts that were excluded from the Bible, but have been preserved in various forms throughout history. These writings delve into the lives of Adam and Eve after their expulsion from Eden, and they offer some intriguing hints about what might have happened to their descendants, including Cain and his wife. The books of Adam and Eve suggest that the early human family was caught in a constant battle between good and evil, light and darkness, a battle that's mirrored in the union of Cain and his wife. Here's where it gets really bold. Some interpretations of these texts suggest that Cain's wife could have been a being of both light and darkness, embodying the duality that defines the human experience. She could represent the merging of the divine and the earthly, the spiritual and the material, just like Cain himself. And if that's the case, then their marriage wasn't just about survival or procreation, it was about the continuation of a cosmic drama, one that's been playing out since the dawn of time. So, what does all this mean? It means that the story of Cain and his wife might be far more complex, far more layered, than we've ever imagined. The banned and suppressed texts we've explored suggest that their union wasn't just a footnote in the history of humanity, it was a pivotal moment in a much larger, much deeper narrative. A narrative that challenges us to look beyond the surface, to question the official story, and to consider the possibility that the truth is far more mysterious, far more profound, than we ever thought. Now, where do we go from here? That's up to you. But one thing's for sure, Cain and his wife have a story that's worth digging into, a story that's as relevant today as it was thousands of years ago. Now, let's pivot to something that ties all of these ideas together, symbolic interpretations, and the modern scholarly debates that continue to swirl around Cain's wife. See, one of the most fascinating things about this story is that it's not just about who Cain's wife was, it's about what she represents. And that's where things get really deep. In modern biblical scholarship, there's been a growing interest in the idea that Cain's wife isn't just a historical figure, but a symbol, a representation of broader themes that run through the entire Bible. Think about it. Cain is the first murderer, a man marked by God and cast out into the wilderness. His wife, then, could symbolize the idea of redemption, the possibility of new beginnings even after the darkest of sins. In this sense, their union is more than just a marriage, it's a statement about the resilience of the human spirit, about the potential for grace in the most unexpected places. Some scholars go even further, suggesting that Cain's wife might represent the concept of civilization itself. After all, Cain is credited with founding the first city, a place called Enoch. His wife could then be seen as the embodiment of the human drive to build, to create, and to thrive, even in a world that's been cursed. In this interpretation, the story of Cain and his wife is the story of humanity's relentless push forward, our refusal to give up, even when faced with the consequences of our own actions. But let's not stop there, because there's another angle to consider: feminist interpretations of the story. In recent years, some scholars have argued that Cain's wife could be a symbol of the often overlooked role of women in the Bible. She is unnamed, unrecognized, and yet she plays a crucial role in the continuation of the human race. In this view, Cain's wife represents the countless women throughout history whose contributions have been erased or minimized, yet without whom civilization could not exist. And here's where things get really interesting. Some modern interpretations suggest that the entire story of Cain and his wife is less about the literal and more about the metaphorical. Cain's wife could be seen as a stand-in for all the relationships we form as we navigate a world that's far from perfect, a world marked by sin, struggle, and the search for meaning. In this light, their story is our story, a reflection of the complexities and contradictions that define the human experience. So, after all this exploration, where does that leave us? Who, or what, was Cain's wife? Here's the conclusion we've been building towards. Cain's wife, like so many of the figures in these ancient stories, might not be just one thing. She could be a real person, a symbol, a myth, or a metaphor, or perhaps all of these at once. She embodies the mystery of our origins, the tension between the known and the unknown, the human and the divine. And maybe that's exactly as it should be. Because at the end of the day, Cain's wife is more than just a character in an ancient story. She's a reminder that some mysteries are meant to be pondered, not solved. She challenges us to keep asking questions, to keep exploring, and to keep searching for meaning in a world that often defies easy answers. So, to everyone who stayed with me on this incredible journey, thank you. Thank you for being curious, for thinking deeply, and for joining me in this exploration of one of the Bible's most enduring mysteries. If you enjoyed this dive into the story of Cain's wife, don't forget to like the video, drop a comment below with your thoughts, and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on more mind-blowing content like this. And remember, no matter where your journey takes you, keep asking questions, keep seeking truth, and as always, God bless us all.